Welcome back to our Create with Code UI click game. Currently we have it so that our score updates based on what objects that we've clicked on the bottom. So if we click on good ones, they have an assigned value that comes from their prefab right here, point value. We're passing that through into a game manager, which updates this score. But we also, want to make the game feel more like a game where there's a conclusion to it. So we're going to create some GameOver text that will show whenever our good objects hit this sensor down here at the bottom. It's kind of hard to see, I'm sure, but and we're going to make it also so when the game over occurs, there will be no more spawning and the score will go back to 0. And finally, we'll make sure we have a restart game button that'll allow us to start the game again. So let's get started with it. So let's think about what it is that we would need. Well, if we're going to start with a game over text, something to show up on the screen, we know that now that's called user interface, and we need to go create a game object to hold that. So we're going to go over here and create a new UI and text mesh pro. There you go. You'll know that it already puts it inside of the same canvas. We have a canvas right here, and it just adds a new text object as part of that. And I'm just going to call this text, the name of it, game over text. That will be the name. And let's go ahead and move this. I think it should show up in the middle. So I'm going to move it here and move it up. Now, a better option probably is to go over here to our rectangle transform, click on it, hold Command down on a MacBook. Option, always forget, and then hit this here, and it'll snap it to the middle. That looks pretty good. I'm going to play with just a few options here. I'm going to go ahead and give it, I think I'm going to give it the name Game Over. Just type that in here, Game Over. And it's kind of hard to see, so let's change. Do I have other font options? I do. You might not have any. That's fine. I'm going to choose that one, I think. And I'm going to change its vertex color to something like black so that you can see it. I'll make it bold. And I can see that the text is indented are going towards the right. Its alignment is to the left, to the left. So I'm going to change the alignment so that's sort of sitting in the middle. And I think overall that looks pretty good. So what's going to control this? What's going to make this appear and disappear? Well, we want to reference something that knows when the game is over. And the thing that's going to control and know that is going to be our game manager. So let's go to our game manager. Oops, here it is. And I'm going to open up that script. And here we are. So what are the things that we need? Well, variable-wise, we need to know what that text is. So I'm going to put this here. We need to know our text. And we need to know our text object. And we want to make sure that it is on. I guess, well, do we want it to be true? I guess we want it to, let's work on disable or not. So for now, let's just test it out so that when the game starts, we'll say game over text is true. So, or basically set active here. This is just a test to make sure that you guys remember or recall, how we do deactivate and, to disable or set active something. So we know we need a variable that's going to call for that, which is going to be just like line 10 right here. We already are using this namespace called text mesh pro on line 4. So I'm going to create a public text mesh pro unity game. There you go. GUI, and we'll call it game over text and put a semicolon. And for now, just as a test sample, I'm going to go back into Unity really quick, and I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to disable it. I'm going to set it inactive. And for our testing, let's have the script to turn it on. And then we'll basically repeat this process. So GameOver text dot game object dot set active. And we call it a game object because the text box is a game object. And we want it set active, we want it to be true. We want it to be set that way. And put a semicolon there. I'm going to save that. Now, this doesn't know, line 20 doesn't know what GameOver text is, doesn't know which one specifically. So we're going to have to initialize it. Now, remember, we could go and find that game object here in the start, but we'll just do it in the inspector since that's why we made it public. So I will go back here. Did I save? Make sure I did. I did. Okay. I'm going to go to my game manager. And here we have in the inspector, I have a GameOver text and it's blank. So I'm going to drag that text into here. And so as we press start, we should see, I'm going to click on this, we should see that the GameOver text will be made active. Great, that looks good. So the next thing is we want to basically have a function, something that will let us know when the game is over, and then it'll trigger all these things. It'll turn off the spawner. It will turn on the GameOver text. It will, yeah, I mean, really that's the main thing we want it to do at this point. So we're going to hold this inside of our game manager. So down here at the bottom on line 37, so let's think about what we want it to do. Well, we need a method, so let's just do this here. Public void game over, and let's list the things. I'm going to put it out in comments what we want it to do. We want make the game over text active, so you want that to appear. Oops, I didn't spell make correctly. And we want to stop spawning. How about this? Let's just go ahead and let's just fix this part. So to make the game over text appear, well, that's line 20. So we'll just move this, Command X, and I'm going to move it into the game over right there, and save. Okay, so now we have this method. When do we want the game over to happen? I guess that's, when would we want to call this? We want that to happen whenever our target hits the sensor. So let's go back into our target script. And we already have a method here. I'll put some comments here. This on trigger enter is called when anything hits our sensor. Well, we want the game to be over. I'm going to put the comments in here. We want this to restart the game if it hits a good item. Or we can also say just a bad, it hits a bad good item. It hits a good item, which is the same thing as or a not bad an item. Yeah, so the idea is if we want the skulls to drop, but the fresh fruit to be things that cause the game to restart. So let's do an if statement. If the game object dot compare tag. So if it has a tag, how about we can just, do we give it a good tag? Let's go look. I gotta remember on our prefabs. We did not tag them. And instead of, let's just tag our bad item. Let's do that. So I'm going to open this prefab. And we're going to say if it doesn't hit a bad tag, then game over. So if it hits something and it's not a bad tag, then do that. So I'm going to add a tag onto my item here. I'm going to plus. We'll call it bad. Bad. Now make sure that you go back in and actually apply the tag. Once you make it, doesn't mean that it's applied. There we go. So let's go back to our script. If the game object compare tag bad. Now we want to say if the game object doesn't have a bad tag. So there's a not statement here at the beginning shift. I'm going to put an exclamation point. If the game object does not have a compare tag called bad, then we want it to look at our game manager. And do we already have a reference for it? Yes, we do. On line 19, we've already created a variable, which is the finding our game manager object and then getting its script, which is also called game manager. So we already have a reference for it. So now we can call from that script game manager dot, and then you get a list, and it will probably pull up. Here's a method called GameOver. There's our method that we want. We need to put an argument at the end of that and then a semicolon. So save that. So what happens is if our sensor hits something that does not have a tag called bad, if it has any other tag that other than bad, then it will restart the game. So we can go test that. Well, our way of knowing that that's happening, so this is called, is basically right now it's just going to turn on the game over text. So that's our way of checking right now. And that should not restart the game. That should not restart the game. That should not restart the game. But this apple should say game. There you go. Great. So whenever the apple fell below and it came in contact, probably should have been looking at that in our scene view. When it came in contact with the sensor down here, then it pulled up. It called that game over method, and then it showed that text. Well, of course, I mean, it's not really game over unless like you stop spawning and all that kind of stuff. So we've done this before. We're going to use a means to check and see if the game is over. And as soon as I say that, I say like game is over, then I think, okay, it's a true or false statement. So that's got to be a variable. So that's our in our game manager script. Our game manager is controlling spawning. So we're basically going to say stop spawning if the game over is not true. So what variables do we need? Well, we know here at the very top, we need to check and see if game is active, if the game is playing or whatever. So I know I need that. I'll just go ahead and create it. So public boolean, and we'll call it is the game active? And that's a question we're going to sort of ask ourselves. Now when the game starts, I didn't spell active right. When the game starts, do we want this to be true? Yes. So I will just put this here. I'll put on towards the top. So we'll say is game active, and we will set it equal to, so this is a single equal sign, and we will say true. There you go. So when do we want this to be false? Well, whenever the game is over. So let's go down to game over, and let's set is game active equal to false. Great. And let's think. So spawn target. Right now we have a while true statement. So as long as this thing is true, it's going to keep spawning. So why don't we make the condition if game active is, while the game is active, now if we could say equals equals, so this is checking true. While this is true, then you can spawn things. So whenever this is not true, it will stop. right? You don't have to say equals equals true. That is the same thing as saying while the game is active. Great. So let's see if that works. That should stop the spawning. Let's see if that is the case. So as soon as like an apple or something hits this bottom object here, so that won't stop it, that skull won't, but this one of these objects will, and oh yeah. So it did stop spawning. It spawned right after that because it's still in a wait for seconds, I think, and it was like a second after, which is fine. So it did stop spawning once the first one hit. It wasn't immediate, but I think for our purposes, that is okay. Now, one more thing is though, the score would keep, let me get out of play mode here, make sure I save. The score would keep updating though. So like that last item that was still in the air, I could click and add points even though the game was technically over. So let's make sure that we can't click on anything either whenever that's true. So where was that at? That was in our, wasn't that on our target script? Yeah, on mouse down. So we can just call for this boolean here in the game manager. We'll say if the game is active, then we can click. So the target doesn't know, the target script doesn't know what, it can't see this boolean here is game active unless we give it a reference to the game manager, which we have one on line 19. So to say, I'm gonna go to line 40, if, open up some parentheses, if the game manager dot is game active, if that is equals true, you don't have to type that, but that's what we're basically saying there. If that is true, then this part will happen. I'm going to open up some method brackets and just take all of this, Command X, and put it inside of that if statement, that if then statement. Let's save that and see what we have. So the game starts, we're spawning a skull, we wouldn't click that, we would let that hit. Okay, game over, can I still click? And I'm unable to click these items, and it does stop spawning. So that feels like a really good way to end the game. But we also want the game to be able to restart, because then the player, they don't have access to this play like we do and stuff. So we're gonna make a button for that, a restart button. Restart buttons are part of the user interface. So let's go over here again to our hierarchy and let's create a button. And you can do just button, or I'm going to do Text Mesh Pro since we've been using that. And you can see a massive button shows up. You know what? Do we want, let's go ahead and name this button. Let's give it a name over here in the inspector. And you can see it's still part of the canvas, right? It's part of that one big object that holds all of our user interface. We'll call it restart button. And on it, it has a text object. And that text object is what goes on the button. So we now can say restart. And let's move our restart button sort of like below where our game object, so we know that the game over text kind of appears right in the middle. So I know that my restart button should probably appear kind of like right here. And you know what I could do is I can anchor it. Let me anchor it. So clicking on the rectangle transform, holding Option down, I'll put it in this, what if I do bottom middle? That'll be fine. I think that's pretty good. I could move it up some, but I think that'll be fine for our purposes. Pretty good. So our next step is actually to make the button work. So we want to restart the level. And we've done this before a couple times when we had our game restart. Like in the farmer game, if if something went below the bottom of the screen, we had a restart. We had to use something called the scene manager. So let's go ahead and go to our game manager script. And we need to use the scene management namespace to be able to restart that scene. So line 4, using Unity engine dot scene. Oh, not supposed to be a period. Scene management. We'll put a semicolon there. So this basically gives us a access to all of the ways that we can restart a scene. We didn't have that until we add this namespace here. And so let's make a method that will actually restart the game. So I'm going to go to end line 45. I wonder if we could just put it in the game over. I prefer not. It's always better to separate things that are doing things individually. So game over isn't restarting the game. It just tells the game is over, and then after that, then it will restart the game. So public void, and we'll just call it restart. Oh my gosh, my spelling is not on point. Restart game, and what do we want to have happen? Well, we want to restart the scene, and then we've done this a couple times. We've done scene manager dot load scene, and it needs to know what scene. That's what the argument is for this. So here's this integer, a scene build index. I just want to show you that in case we haven't done this before, that part of it. I want to show you what that looks like. So if I go to File, you don't have to do this. Just follow along. I'm going to go to Build Settings. And it says Scenes and Build. So if I were to build my game right now, it would tell me what platform was it made for and all that. But it doesn't actually have any scenes. So I'm going to add open scenes. And it's almost like an array or a list. It has an index number. So the scene that we're currently in has a value of 0, like an array. And so I could just put in this integer here. I want to load the scene 0. But a more flexible way and probably a better way of doing this is we just ask the scene manager instead to dot get the active scene, whatever scene we're in, and dot name. And the reason why we do this, so this is telling the scene manager find the current scene we're in, its name, which happened to be prototype 5, and then load that scene. This is because if we want to restart the game from another scene, if we had more levels, then this would no longer work. It would always restart back into prototype 5. But if we were even on another scene, because the prototype 5 had an integer 0. So if we had put just 0 here, that would always go to 0. This gives us the flexibility to add more levels if we wanted to do so. So that's great. This will load the current scene. Now we have a method here that is restarting the game, but we actually haven't called it yet. And you can call it script, but a really cool thing that you can do is on your button. This is how buttons work. This is what's so neat about them. Is if you scroll down the inspector, you have a button component here and asks you some questions. Interactable, we can change the color tint of the button. This is how you play with options on the button. Whatever its value is and so forth. We don't have to really play with that too much, but that button component gives you all of these options. But the part we were most interested in is on click, which is called from the user interface whenever we click this object. And what we want to have happen is when we click the restart button is that the restart game function in our game manager is called. So we can hit the plus symbol, and then we can choose what object do we reference. And the question is, where is this game manager script, the one that we're going to use, and it's on the game manager object. So I'm just going to drag this into here. Boom. And now this no function option picks up and it says, which of those functions do you want to do? We can call a function from the game object, from its transform, but the game manager itself has on here all the things that it can do, and one of those things is restart the game. There you go. So now, whenever we click this, it will find the game manager and run restart game. So let's see if that works. Now, I don't want this to be there. I'm just click restart, but you can tell it did restart the game. I guess we should make it so that that is disabled. So let's turn off the restart button. So when the game starts, it's not showing, and then have it be set active whenever the game over occurs. So what I'm saying is, whenever the game is over, just like we did here, we made the GameOver text active. Let's do the same thing for our button. Before we can do it though, the game doesn't know what the button is, so we need to go set a reference for it. We need to make a variable. So let's go get a public button. That's the type. Oh, you know what? If I try to type in button right now, it won't show up. It'll give me an on mouse button, something, blah, 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 blah. We don't need that because we need to reference user interface as a namespace. Just like we can't mess with scenes unless we call scene management. We can't mess with text mesh pro objects unless we do this. We need to do the same thing for user interface. So line 6, using Unity engine .ui. There we go. So now on line 16 for me, I can make a public button, and now I have that option. I didn't have that before. That's what namespaces do. They give you access to things that are specific to that type of namespace, or that that class. And let's call it the restart button. So we will set this in the inspector. That's why I want to make it public. We're not going to try to initialize it here in the start. We don't want to. We don't have to go find it. That's totally okay for what we're doing. So in our GameOver script, let's make the restart button dot game object, since it is a game object, and we are going to set it active and make that true. Set active to true. Save that. So we know that we need to go and put this onto our game manager. So game manager, here we go. Restart button right now doesn't know which one, but we know that it's this one here. We drag it in and press play. And when the game is over, so right now it is inactive, but whenever that apple hits the sensor, there you go. We get a game over and the restart button shows up. We click it and the game will start again. Perfect. Great. Well, that is the end of this video. In the next one, we're going to use buttons just like we did this time, but use it to change the difficulty of our game. So that should be pretty interesting. I'll see you in the next video.